One thing I really wanted to break into after my Worlds run last year was sharing my theory to help the general community improve at Cardfight Vanguard. We're going to be discussing in medium depth, evaluating cards and lines. I am a competitor and theorist first and foremost, so my video making will be amateurish compared to the ideas I have. If you can tolerate that, I hope I can teach you new things about the game we love. As an exercise, consider Blaster Dark. Without the context of the deck it's played in, is it a good card? How do you even answer a question like that? In general, cards and actions have costs and restrictions. A cost can be anything from an explicitly printed cost on the card to a more advanced idea, like the opportunity cost of playing one effect over another when the resources they ask for, compete, and are finite. If you pay costs, generally it will return you some level of value. Groundbreaking stuff, I know. Measuring the value a card provides can be considered the advantage that card or action provides. Card advantage. Often when you hear that term, it will be more generally referring to the quantity of cards an action creates. You'll develop faster as a player, though, to consider an expected value system similar to chess, where piece advantage is measured in centibons rather than full pieces. In the context of Vanguard, instead of measuring card advantage in cards, consider evaluating it in guard value, or fragments of damage. Jumping back to Blaster Dark, no matter what, if some skill, including its auto, retires one of your rear guards, this card becomes 15,000 power. As a rear guard, it asks for 10,000 shield into a sub-grade 3 Vanguard, and 5,000 shield into most grade 3 Vanguards. If you meet this restriction for the continuous ability, it will usually give you 5,000 power advantage. This is not to say that all plus 5,000 skills create 5,000 advantage. For a hyperbolic example, to make the difference clear, if your Hop and Step Fennel Vanguard swings into a Fountain of Knowledge Ava Vanguard with an otherwise empty board, and the drive check reveals a Chocho Sarah, the trigger effect to give a unit 5,000 power doesn't actually create 5,000 pressure. What about the auto? The first cost is that it must be placed either on van or rear circle. This means at least another skill has to be used to place it, and at most, you have to place it from hand. Placing this card from hand to van is at minimum an inherent minus 5k guard pressure, and in general, cards exiting your hand should be viewed as losing some level of defensive pressure, so we're going to factor that information into our assessment of cost. In addition, you must pay a counterblast and retire another rearguard on your board to pay the printed cost of this card. It's not a great stretch to say that this auto ability is fairly expensive in a vacuum. Expensive costs aren't inherently bad, especially if the return is worthwhile, but it's something to be mindful of when evaluating a card. In exchange for that cost, you may retire one opponent rearguard, and Blaster Dark gains drive +1. As an aside, evaluating the net value of each retire involves calculating the net pressure of the card being retired. As a general heuristic, retiring a card destroys value equal to the pressure and power they would create on their owner's turn if not retired, or of the intercept value, depending on which is more likely to be the best use of the card. To be dramatic, retiring your opponent's card with no abilities and 0k attack creates different pressure than retiring your opponent's card that says, on attack, you win the game. It's distinctions like this that are why measuring an integer card advantage is outdated. As for the drive +1, this only matters if Blaster Dark is on the Vanguard circle or is given the ability to perform drive checks as a rearguard, which unsurprisingly makes this ability more valuable as a ride target on grade 2 than it does as a regular rearguard skill, at least in a vacuum. So that's a lot of waffling to say this card's costs and rewards are a variable range with a wide distribution. How does that help me know if this card is any good? Realistically, there's two answers. You could mathematically calculate its net value via a weighted average of every possible situation. Practically, think of something like Stockfish in chess. Or you could estimate it heuristically, with the concepts you'd use to calculate it in mind, relative to what's played in games you'd expect. This card has expensive costs, and the general return for paying those costs is realistically not favorable. It isn't a very good card in a vacuum. But Cardfight Vanguard cards aren't played because they're good in a vacuum. We're missing a very important idea that makes certain cards worth playing: shells. So what's a shell? It's the minimum core of a deck that makes up that deck's base strategy. There are 3 basic kinds of shells: consistency shells, pressure shells, and resource shells. Each are named for the thing they provide most. And although many shells in practice are mixed, and it's better not to label them this way, as a building block concept, it is useful. As an example of a compact shell in Vanguard, let's look at Ava. Across her ride line, the shell uses two types of cards: research orders and obscurate. Some amount of those cards have to be present in the deck for it to function. Modern Eva, of course, has other considerations to make, and this is an oversimplification as a whole, but it's important to notice something about her shell before going back to Blaster Dark. The general purpose of her effects is to provide consistent access to the specific pieces she needs to win the game. She's a consistency shell. Blaster Dark, on the other hand, slots into shells like Majesty Lord Blaster, the base package of which functions completely differently. Reading over their effects, it's clear the shell provides pressure, a pressure shell as it were. That isn't to say it doesn't have light resource gain, but the purpose of the shell is to pressure the opponent. When evaluating what cards to put into Eva versus MLB, you have to address what needs the shell doesn't provide for. As a consistency shell, Eva needs the cards she sees consistently to create resources and pressure for her, and for the cards not actively within that shell's domain to also create pressure and provide resources. Because she is a shell who has consistent access to archetypes of cards instead of specific cards, she's enabled to run as few or as many pressure cards as she would like to, and thus is untethered in most metas. She can play aggro, control, or tempo. MLB, on the other hand, as a pressure shell, has less guaranteed consistency, and is forced to receive in-archetype consistency pieces or be a scammy, bricky pile of aggro slop. Anyone familiar with MLB over D-Format's history probably knows which fate the shell has been relegated to. Not to say pressure shells can't be powerful or relevant to the meta, but their dominance is heavily gatekept by how consistent D-Format is. Individual cards and shells are all well and good, but an optimized deck is more than the sum of those parts. In fact, deck building is one of the premier places to demonstrate your strength in evaluating cards and the lines a list can provide. As a deck builder, the goal is to pair a given shell with the highest EV cards overall. As a competitive player, the goal is to pair that deck building with the highest EV deck selection possible. For building a deck, cards shouldn't just be evaluated by their flat theoretical value, but their synergy with the shell, their synergy with other cards you're considering running, and the opportunity cost of running those specific cards over other options. A truly solid competitive deck takes a consistent shell with high relative pressure into the meta and does so from its floor. Most metas, where a single particular deck is dominant, are examples of this, whereas 5-deck plus wide metas tend to suffer from inconsistent floors paired with immense ceilings. A good metric for if a competitive deck is well built is how well it plays out of a complete non-starter opening hand. If your first 5 to 8 cards are triggers, and the deck is functional or better, your floor is probably in the right place. Especially when goldfishing, deliberately giving yourself poor hands instead of always playing from pure random is a powerful tool for assessing your deck's limits. So, you've built a deck around a shell, evaluating carefully the cards that went into it. Is that the end? No. The first draft of a list in Standard is rarely optimized. How shells and their pieces play into each other, and which shells you're likely to see, heavily influences which non-core pieces end up in a deck. In a meta with more heavy removal, you might want to run more cards with resist, or who call themselves from drop, when you otherwise want to run cards with guard from board value. Testing your deck list into what you expect to see, and a healthy dose of random stuff, will help you identify when perhaps you've over-indexed on particular parts of your engine or on frill cards. Another thing to consider is whether your line evaluation when deck building carries through to the games themselves. Sometimes your hot dog, hamburger, taco, OTK strategy looks like the second coming, and then you sit down to play games with a list, and it's not functional. If you found this at all helpful, I'm really glad to hear it. If it's not too much to ask, please let me know what specifically helped, so I can better tailor my approach in any future discussion. There will not be a regular release schedule. Thanks for your time and attention, though.